Look, local government is where it's at. If you think about our communities day in, day out delivering for services, and particularly when we have Labour administrations, making a difference. And we've seen that across the councils in England, Wales, Scotland. We're the largest party in local government, and it's Labour activists working with the community to deliver those communities and the networks that we need to build that better society we all want. So get involved.
Hello and welcome to the We Are Labour podcast. I am Dan Grief, your host, and this is the show that highlights our amazing Labour candidates and the constituencies we need to win to form the next Labour government. As you hear the stories and experiences from our candidates, I want you to think, how can you help? What can you do to make the difference? Can you go and leaflet, knock on doors, donate money, or phone canvass voters? By giving a little of your time and or money, it will make a massive difference. This election will be won by Labour members doing our bit to help get the Labour message of hope out to our communities. Let's crack on with the show. Hello, are you doing well? Maybe you're listening to this as you're going for a run. Perhaps you're doing some baking. Maybe you're having problems sleeping and this is your insomnia cure. Whatever the reason, thank you for choosing We Are Labour again. Now, today's episode is all about the local election on the 2nd of May. And so for that reason, we have two very special people. That is Vince Maple. He is the council leader in Medway. And we also have Jane Ashworth, and Jane Ashworth is another councillor in Stoke-on-Trent. Both of them are council leaders. Now, they don't actually have elections this year in their councils, which is great because it meant they had the time to talk to me. But this is really to make you aware, and I'm sure you are already, about the local elections that are happening, and also the Police and Crime Commissioner elections as well, and in some parts of the country, mayoral elections. So if you want to get involved in a campaign, then now is the time. And as you've got now just under a week until those elections, this is kind of the crunch moment with any effort really does help. So go out, find where the candidates are in your local area, see what you can do to help them. These local elections before a general election have a particular significance. And as you can imagine, people up and down the country will be looking at them with, the analysis of what's going on there to try and work out what's going to happen in the national picture. So in this episode, not only do I have two fantastic councillors, I also have John Curtice doing a guest appearance. And John comes on to explain to us what he thinks we should be looking for in those local elections. The John Curtice episode, because I did a whole interview with him, that will be coming out next week on Tuesday. So you're going to go check that one out. It's Tuesday next week, which is the 30th of April, just in time for those local elections. And he does some more deep dive analysis as to what you'd expect to see in them. So I will now hand over to our local councillors, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Please make sure you're subscribed. We haven't got many reviews, so if you want to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, that'd be fantastic. And obviously a lovely comment on YouTube would be nice as well. Take care and have a great weekend. I'll now hand you over to Vince Maple and Jane Ashworth. It gives me great pleasure now to welcome two of our fantastic councillors to the show. Our first councillor today is Councillor Jane Ashworth. She's the council leader for Stoke-on-Trent City Council. Welcome to We Are Labour, Jane.
Thanks very much for inviting me. I'm thoroughly looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. And we also have Councillor Vince Maple. He is the leader of Medway Council, and he's also the chair of the ALC, which is the Association of Labour Councillors. Welcome to the show, Vince.
Thanks very much, Dan. It's great to be here with you. Great to be sharing the conversation with Jane as well. Look forward to the time we've got ahead.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, I just want to say that if you are new to the party, you might not be as anywhere you are in the country. They may have different responsibilities from each other. So would you mind starting, Jane, with telling me about your council? What type of council is it? How is it different to maybe other councils? What roles, responsibilities do you have?
We're one of those councils that you tend to find in London boroughs and cities and in other places too, but fundamentally there, which does everything. It's our job to do everything from social services through to keeping the roads clean. So we don't have a split Everything that happens in our city is organised by the city council. We're not like those district authorities which surround us in Staffordshire, where we are, where they've got a district council which has some jobs and the county council which has other jobs. So we're a unitary authority all in one.
Fantastic. Vince, what about other kinds of councils? Because you're also a unitary council, aren't you? So county, for instance, where I am, they have very different responsibilities to district. And then you get parish councils as well, which, of course, a whole different tier. So have you served on parish councils, unitary councils and other councils, or are you just in your unitary?
So the makeup of Medway is we are a unitary as well, as similar to Stoke-on-Trent. Lots of people who will be tuning in from Kent will often hear reference to Kent and Medway because they're seen as the two upper tier authorities. In local government terms, often there are 4 tricky issues that are talked about. So adult social care, children's social care, SEND transport, so special education needs and disabilities transport. They sit with county councils and unitary authorities. And then the 4th one is temporary accommodation, and that sits with district and borough councils, but again, unitary authorities. So Jane and I and other unitary authority leaders have all 4 of the tricky square when it comes to local government. Dan, you mentioned town and parish councils as well. They are absolutely important to lots of communities that have those. We've got a handful of parish councils in Medway. I've never served on a parish council. Where I live in the middle of Chatham doesn't have a parish council. It's worth saying that for lots of technical reasons, the Association of Labour Councillors and indeed the Labour Party doesn't formally recognise town and parish councils in the rule book. But I do absolutely recognise that for many communities across certainly England and Wales with their community councils, town and parish councils play a key role and are often where lots of people first get their appetite for local democracy. So although not formally recognised by the Labour Party, I certainly personally know many town and parish councillors who do a great job for the communities, the kind of hyper-local democracy that's talked about there.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, I think that it's probably our councillors who have the most on-the-ground experience when it comes to issues that are going on in their area, because you're the ones who pick up the casework, you're the ones who see the problems, you see where things need to be fixed for people. So can you tell me a bit about the difference you make, Jane, in your area as a councillor, and also as a council leader, you set the agenda for what your council achieves for your community?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's very clear that councillors are the eyes and ears of their neighbourhoods. Sometimes a ward that you represent can be quite large, and you might be one of 3 councillors, for instance. Here, we tend to be single-member wards where you represent about 4,000 people in a neighbourhood where you know every nook and cranny. You know the names of the dogs because you've canvassed it. You know who's a leading figure on each of the streets. And the clever bit is to use that knowledge to drive the direction of the council. So as an example here, we know from what our councillors tell us that fly tipping has been an absolutely massive problem over the last 5 or 6 years when the Conservatives were running the council. Because of the knowledge of those local councillors, because that goes into the casework system, because we can analyse the casework system, looking for trends and hotspots and so on and so forth, that tells us how to organise a campaign. So we did. And we were able to move something like 2,000 job lots of fly tipping within a few months to make a real difference to the quality of the neighbourhood that people live in. But that was all because local councillors knew what they were talking about. So you can make a big difference. There's nothing more demoralising than living in an area which is dirty. It says you've been neglected. It says no one cares about your area. It says your neighbours, if it's them that are the perpetrators, are less than trustable and don't share your values of keeping your patch a good place to live in. And that's not a good state of play, really. So it's been very important to us to lift the morale of a neighbourhood, try to bring back a bit of pride by at least keeping it clean.
Yeah, completely agree. Vince, what about yourself? Do you have any stories where you've had that impact with your area, that you've made a difference to a family or individuals' lives?
Yeah, so I've been really lucky, and of course, not every councillor has to necessarily live in the ward they represent. Many don't. You have to. There's certain criteria you have to fulfil, and if you want to be a Labour councillor, you do need to live in the borough. The law doesn't say that, but the Labour Party rulebook does. I've always lived in the ward I represent, and it's a real privilege. So my constituents are literally my next door neighbours, and indeed my partner in my own house, and myself, I guess. I'm my own councillor, along with two colleagues. Like Jane said, we predominantly in Medway, actually, we have multi-member wards. So I represent in the region of 12,000 residents in Chatham Central and Brompton. One of the things, and Jane's absolutely right in the sense of that local intelligence. You know, we have a formal monthly advice surgery, but every time I pop to the local Morrison's local round the corner from me, that's an advice surgery as well. When I get on the 164 bus, that's an advice surgery as well. And whatever the law says, I am never off duty, as I know the vast majority of councillors. So I'll always want to have those conversations. One of the big changes, so I've been a councillor 17 years next month, which feels like a long time. One of the things I've seen as a local councillor is an increase in actually people needing support with, say, issues with the DWP. So personal independence payments, or PIP. It is a scheme which, again, I could probably spend a 3-hour polemic podcast talking about all the flaws in it. And what often will happen is that actually, residents will speak to other residents and say, actually, I got some real good support from my local councillor. And then when they've got a similar issue, they'll come forward to myself and indeed my colleagues. So that's certainly something. And I'm really clear, and I say this on a regular basis. And Jane and I both had the privilege of becoming council leaders last year. In my inaugural speech at our annual council, I made it clear that being council leader, in my role on the Association of Labour Councillors, none of that could happen without the support of Chatham Central and Brompton residents who I represent, and Jane will be the same, and all those other Labour council leaders. We're only able to do all the things we can do in those additional roles because we have the support of our local residents. So that's critical.
Yeah, it's that working together, isn't it? That's the key thing. And I think I love what you're saying as well, Jane, about being the eyes and the ears and the connection on the ground. It is the thing that really matters. And it also links to if you have a Labour MP as well, that's the information to them to tell them what's happening locally as well. So you can make a difference, because sometimes national policy is enacted locally, and that's where people need to help. But of course, you have to change national policy and help people locally, so it joins up the whole system. And I think people might not always realise that. I suspect sometimes Labour Party members join because of national politics without realising that actually there's this key bit in the middle, and this is where the local councils make all the difference to our communities. Or a badly run council, we know there's a lot of Tory councils that have gone through quite a hard time, where services just are cut and there's nothing available, and the difference is quite stark.
I think you're right about the importance of the council for carrying out policy, because lives are lived locally. Yes, of course, national government sets the economic framework, for instance, and the taxation framework and so on and so forth. But actually, what you're doing on a Wednesday afternoon, what you're going to be doing over the weekend, where you're working, how you get there, by bus, train, bike, or your own car, they're really all very much determined by what's happened with your local council. And so long as you remember, I think anyway, this will get you through a bad moment, really, that it's lives that are lived locally that we can have the most effect on. And that is often communities which are not the best served by all kinds of services. And we are quite good at improving the quality of life in those kinds of neighbourhoods. Of course, we don't only work in deprived areas. That would be ridiculous. We have a duty to enhance the general quality of life across a whole city or borough or whatever it may be. But there are particular things that we can do that do make a huge difference to people who really need that kind of help. For instance, in our situation, it was councillors before officers who knew that we had a bigger problem with damp in some of our 17,000 council homes far before anybody else realised, because we're always talking to people. Formally on the doorstep, of course, but as Vince said, really, it's a routine matter. Wherever you go out, you're going to have a chat with somebody. And you're going to find out, as we found out, that people are really upset by the levels of damp in their council properties. So that's our current campaign, actually, is to drive out damp and mould from council homes. Again, only triggered because we knew it from our knowledge as local councils.
Brilliant. That's really a great example of how that will make a massive difference to people's well-being. I mean, mould in your home is no joke, and especially if you've got a young family, that's quite terrifying. There was that child who died, I believe, of black mould, wasn't there, in the house? So it is so essential.
In our situation, because it's the old potteries, a lot of older people have got COPD, and finding yourself in a situation where people have got COPD and they've got damp and mould is an outrage in the, whatever date. You can imagine at any point in the last 50 years, you think that's well out of order. But for it to be prevalent now is a disgrace to the condemnation of the investment levels in our public services. So it's pretty important, I think, that we get on top of this and get it sorted out sharpish.
Fantastic point. So I'm now going to play for you a clip. This was from my interview with Sir John Curtice, and I was just asking him what he thought we could learn from the local elections on the 2nd of May, and whether that would give us some indication of how Labour is doing for the next general election. I'll just play that now.
Many of these contests are in areas which are already controlled by Labour, at least as far as the council elections are concerned. It's true of most of the metro mayors. It's true of London. Nearly half of the local government council elections that are being fought are places where Labour are already in control. The Conservatives only currently have 2 of the metro mayors, and of course they don't have very much in London. So don't expect very much in the way of headline grabbing Labour gains. Probably the biggest plum that Labour might hope to pick up is Dudley, which, like a number of councils, is amongst the councils where control of is more likely to occur, because it's a whole council election because of board boundary changes rather than a one-third election, which is what's true elsewhere, which again is one of the reasons we're not going to get a great deal of headline grabbing changes of control. Now, one estimate has said that perhaps the Conservatives might lose as many as 500 of the nearly 1,000 seats they're trying to defend, and Labour perhaps pick up 300. I think at this point, however, 2 notes of caution. Note of caution number 1 about expecting perhaps Conservative losses on quite the scale that some people have been talking about is that we now know that Reform are only fighting around 1 in 6 of the local council contests. They are contesting London, contesting the West Midlands, which might be significant, and Greater Manchester, but they're not contesting the rest of the metro mayors. They're only contesting a couple of the PCC contests. And therefore, it's not unreasonable to anticipate, at least, given that it is Reform rather than Labour these days who are picking up more in the way of people who voted Conservative in 2019, that some of these folk, at least, who are minded to vote Reform in the general election may well vote for the Conservatives in the local elections, ? And if they do, then the Conservative losses will not necessarily be on the scale of the opinion polls. In any event, we also know, not least because both the Liberal Democrats and the Greens tend to do better in local elections than they would do in a general election, Labour never really pull off the kind of performance in opinion polls. So you take the swing between 2021 and 2023 locals, it was the order on average around 8%, whereas you would expect a double-digit swing in the opinion polls. So I think there is a risk for Labour of expectations being too high. That said, Labour in the end, they didn't do particularly well last year. Particularly quite remarkably, their own share of the vote didn't really increase on the position 12 months previously, even though the Liz Truss fiscal event had been in between the two, which obviously pushed Labour's national poll positions. So I think in the end of the day, rather than getting too hooked up in what positions are won and lost and who gains councils, etc., what I'm looking for really is three things. One, is Labour's own share of the vote up on where it was in these contests in 2022 and 2023? And secondly, what I'm looking for is the evidence that was there in last year's local elections and which has been picked up by a number of the so-called MRP polling exercises, which is a pattern whereby the Conservatives are losing ground more heavily in places where they were previously strongest, and where, and this is something that polling can't pick up at this stage, and where there was also evidence last year of voters voting tactically against the Conservatives for either Labour or the Democrats. Are those patterns there? In other words, it's the material that's underneath the headlines, the things that you only see once you start looking at the votes rather than getting caught up under seats and changes of control. That's, I think, where the real lessons are potentially going to be. One, in a sense, is a clear test for Labour, and the other two are, as it were, question marks about potential warning signs for the Conservatives.
Right, so you've just heard that clip there. Any thoughts that might have come up there, Vince, for you? What do you think of what he said?
Well, a few bits, and look, Sir John Curtice is an absolute expert in these things. So I always listen carefully to everything he says. I'd say a few things. Firstly, but by the nature of how local government is elected, in local government, I'm talking on the widest kind of vision of this, because of course Jane and I are councillors, but also this coming May the 2nd, we've got police and crime commissioners up for election. And mayors as well. So if we talk about that in the kind of collective local government sense, the set of elections we've got this year is substantially smaller than the ones that Jane and I and our teams were participating in last year. And I think you saw, I would respectfully disagree slightly with Sir John Curtice.
Right,
There's a sentence I never thought I'd say. An analysis of actually last year, because we all know that there is a level of expectation management by all political parties. It's a thing. And the Conservatives were kind of pitching that they expected to lose 1,000 seats. So if they're saying that before the election, they're trying to say, well, actually, if we only lost 700, it wasn't a bad day. They lost more than that. They lost more than their expectation management, including in Stoke-on-Trent, in Medway, and even in places where perhaps we didn't take overall control of the council, but we can absolutely see Labour working in coalition, or indeed having a stronger opposition voice, all of which were important to local democracy. I think, I just think back of the experiences I had last year on the doorstep, and subsequently I've been out, supporting colleagues who have got elections this coming May, and I'm hearing similar. So here in Medway last year, I always remember vividly talking to this chap in his 90s who'd voted Conservative for 70 years. And from that perspective, was saying for the first time in his life, he was voting Labour. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that is purely down to our 5 pledges and the 3 brilliant candidates, all of whom are now Labour councillors, that we spoke to there. There's a combination of factors. So every local government election, there is a combination of factors. I would say last year, the party leader that came up on the doorstep most wasn't Boris Johnson, wasn't Rishi Sunak, wasn't Keir Starmer, wasn't Jeremy Corbyn. It was Liz Truss. And she's still coming up on the doorsteps in Medway now because of the huge impact that her economic disaster of an experiment had on our communities. And why is that important to local government? So Jane and I, our councils are delivering something called the Household Support Fund. We fought hard to have that extended for another 6 months. Part of the reason why that's so important is there are families who have perhaps never accessed council support, local government support, charitable support before, who are having to do that for the first time, an increasing number of people who are in work. So why is all of that relevant? Because actually the impacts of national government will always have an impact on people's opinions, both good and bad, when it comes to voting in a local election. Now, anybody who's involved in local government politics, of course, we would want everybody just to be focusing solely on our campaign, our messages. But anybody in local government who says we won solely because of us as a team of candidates locally and our messaging is pretty naive. The final thing I'd say, and this can't be underestimated, and we may want to talk about this a little bit more, is something called Project Victory, which actually and again, I've been involved for a long time. Often the Labour Party has in previous years almost treated local government elections as second-class citizens, as a kind of local government's the embarrassing uncle in the corner that you don't want to talk to at a Christmas family party. That's not the case now. So we've got the party joined up, working collectively, doing really strong ways of, making sure where there are additional people available that they're supporting campaigns like we had in Stoke-on-Trent, like we had in Medway, like we had in more than 20 councils that we took control of last year. And that's down to, that's not the candidates, that's not the group leaders, that's often people from other neighbouring constituencies and councils, particularly where they haven't got an election, giving their time, giving a couple of hours, and supporting the Labour family in its broadest sense to continue to make progress.
Yeah, Vince is right, isn't he? Vince is very brave to take on John Curtice. I think this might go down as one of his braver political statements from Vince here. He's right in what he says about the importance of everybody working together to make sure we hold control of councils and we go out and win some more. You can't stress enough just how much it matters to people locally that their environment is clean, their schools are good, although it's obviously not quite as much under our control as it used to be, that it's possible to get around easily, that there's a feeling of life and prosperity, or the possibility at least of a good life and prosperity in their own neighbourhood. That's so important, and so much of that is a council's work. But of course, it all depends on the national political context, as Vince said. And you can't really separate them off very, very easily. It's not as glamorous, of course, to be a local councillor, but it's ill-advised, I think, to... sorry to disappoint you there, Vince. It's just not as glamorous. Yeah. And that's why I think it's really important that we move as a block, as a group of people who are willing to do things. But I think something that's quite important, because Curtis said that he didn't think we did as well as perhaps the storybooks say we did last year. We increased in Stoke-on-Trent, our share of the vote was up by 15%. Why was that? Well, it was a low base, so that obviously makes it easier. But it was also because we started very early and we had a lot of really good candidates, and this is the important point. Most of our candidates were people who were really well known in their own patch. Where possible, we stood them in their own patch. We encouraged them. They already were involved in their neighbourhoods. They already knew a lot of people. They were normal people who had a life in their own patch. And that makes a huge difference. So I think when people are thinking about whether there should be a councillor, really, you have to, one of the ways of doing it successfully is to really know your local neighbourhood, not to have ideas that one day you're going to rule the world or anything like that. It's not going to be like that. It's normal people who've got brains and good sense, who can represent their patch, who make some of the very best councillors. So there's a role for everybody, really. And I think that's why we won, actually. That and the fact that the Conservatives did one or two things, like building a car park for an empty city centre, which just became the motif of the election because everybody knew it was pretty ludicrous.
Jane's absolutely right on this, and it's about. And one of the things I would say to any podcast listeners or viewers who are thinking about it, there is a bit of time. what I remember vividly, there's a process you go through for kind of vetting and confirmation panelling to become a Labour candidate. You can't just become one. You've got to go through a process. And I remember vividly my first panelling process where the panel said to me, "Oh yeah, it's just a couple of meetings every 6 weeks. Don't worry about that." Spoiler alert: it wasn't, and it isn't. So I think one of the things I've always encouraged is, a level of honesty to say it's going to take some time. It will have an impact. But Jane's right. You don't need to be the greatest orator. You don't need to be the greatest anything. You just need to have a passion. You need to be hardworking. There's nothing that frustrates me more than a lazy councillor of any political party, because it damages all of us. And there are some lazy councillors, dare I say it. But the vast majority of councillors of all political parties are pretty hardworking, and they want the best for their community. It's just we have different views and kind of visions as to what good looks like for our community. And you say, thankfully, the people of Medway, the people of Stoke-on-Trent, and you say around 20 other communities up and down England gave us, as the Labour Party, or in my case, Labour and Cooperative Party, the chance to serve our community. And I have to say, I think despite the financials that councils are under, myself, Jane, and our colleagues, we have, as you would expect, there's a WhatsApp group of all of the new Labour 23 leaders, and we're supporting each other. We've all just gone through our budget processes, which have been challenging, but we've got each other's back, which is a good thing. So that kind of, we use the word solidarity a lot in the Labour Party. And I think between Labour councillors, there's around 6,500, nearly 7,000 of us. We've got each other's back. That's a good thing.
Oh, lovely. That's really good to hear. And the fact that the bigger party is a network to support you is wonderful. But I also have to reflect on the fact that we know the last 13 years, the cuts have been brutal, they've been severe. If Labour forms the next government, and hopefully we will, can you tell me what would you be looking to that government for in order to make your jobs easier, but also more effective and have a bigger impact? Jane, what do you think?
I was shocked when I first became a councillor to realise that the way the Conservatives work out how much money each council should get from central government isn't really based on the needs of a neighbourhood, of an area, of a city. It's almost unbelievable to think that there's such a dislocation. Like here in Stoke-on-Trent, and I'm sure in many other places, we have a real problem with children in care. We have far too many children in care, and we have a great, which is an extremely expensive service to provide. But there's no recognition of that in the way that we're funded. So our budget is constantly eaten away by cuts from central government, and without any balancing payment to cope with our needs. So, for instance, in 2010, our revenue support grant from central government came in at 97 million. It's now down to 25 million. So creating a city with increasing needs, so in a city with increasing social needs, which are expensive, and a reducing budget, it's a recipe for a very bad situation indeed, and that's what we've got. It's difficult to make ends meet. It's very difficult without making severe cuts and putting up the council tax, which is what we have to do under these circumstances, because nowhere else the money's going to come from fundamentally. It's hard to do all the good things that we want to do.
What about yourself, Vince? What is it you'll be looking for in the next government to make things much better than they are now?
Well, I agree with everything that Jane said there, first and foremost. That from my perspective, look, we have to recognise our starting point. We've got a current Prime Minister who came to a meeting 35 miles up the road from me and made a very proud declaration. He was taking money away from communities like Jane and mine. Yeah. Although we've both got rural areas in both Medway and Stoke-on-Trent, a big chunk of our communities live in deprived urban areas. And Sunak said they're proud to say he was taking money from our community. So we need to stop that. Frankly, we do need funding based on need. Multi-year settlements, which might sound a bit bureaucratic, but actually for planning financial processes are pretty important. So that's something I would want to see, and I'm hopeful we would see. Look, I recognise, if I think about the stepping into the shoes I did last May, of course there are loads of things I would want to do as a council leader, which I'm not able to do at the moment because the resources simply aren't there. Angela Rayner, Jim McMahon, Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, that leadership team, who I hope form part of the next government, they'll be in a similar position. I've got no doubt that there will be a desire to give the local government family the level of resources it needs. But look, like we are locally, and as Jane made reference to, here in Medway, we've had a 91% cut in our revenue support grant since 2010. That's meant that in our first financial year of running the council, we've had to make some difficult decisions. I suspect the incoming Labour government, because of the mess they're going to be left, will be in a difficult situation, having to make some challenging decisions as well, because that's the responsible thing to do. It's the right thing to do. So, there are some mechanics. And I think actually the other thing that sits with me in particular, again, this isn't unique to Medway, I think we need a grown-up conversation about devolution. At the moment, from Michael Gove, who is not my favourite Secretary of State, it has to be said, for lots of reasons. It's basically a binary choice. If you want these powers for your community and resources, you've got to have this form of governance. That's too binary. There needs to be nuance in that. And certainly, I've heard positive words from some of the senior shadow team. So I would be hopeful that for my community, again, if you ask me the question, do I want more powers and funding for the people of Medway and actually the wider people of Kent? Yes, of course, all day long. Do I want an elected mayor of Kent and Medway? No, I don't. Last year's election, not one person said to me, you know what we need, Vince? We need another elected individual. No one said that to me. They said, actually, we need our resources to the level they need to be. We need to make sure that we're getting our streets clean. We need to make sure we've got good quality jobs in our community. That's what people are saying to me. We need help with the cost of living crisis. I want a more mature, nuanced conversation on devolution, and I'm hopeful we'll have that.
I think that's right, Vince. I think the other thing that we'd want a Labour government to be doing early on, because it will actually save money. The proposal that we need to change the way that Ofsted operates, the way that we're able to develop the type of child protection services that are preventative, rather than wait until the problem has really developed into something toxic. That kind of work, that kind of change, which harks us back, of course, to Sure Start, is what will make a huge difference locally and do exactly what you say, which is protect the budget. Because our guys who'll be running the economy are going to be under enough pressure that they just won't be in a situation to be able to solve all our problems all at once. But doing work which will produce savings in the long term and better society, like Sure Start does, will make a huge difference to us in local government as well as every resident in the country, really.
The final thing I'd say on this, and Jane, you're right about some of those early conversations. If you look at the 5 missions, all of those 5 missions need to involve local government. Yeah. All of them. Yeah. Let's be really clear, the next Labour government, and I hope that comes as soon as practically possible, the relationship with local government isn't just from DLUC, isn't just from the Department of Local Government or whatever, I don't know if it will still have the same name or not. I don't know whether we'll have levelling up. There's an esoteric question for you. That will be for others to decide. It needs to have a relationship with the Department of Health. It needs to have a relationship with Department for Transport, Defence. Every government department. There is a relationship with local government, and again, I think that's been sorely lacking from the Conservative government. Absolutely, in the last year, which I can talk about from personal experience, but it feels as if it's been that way for the last certainly 14 years and potentially longer, because actually, the previous Labour government of 13 years did loads of incredibly good things, did some good things around devolution for Scotland and Wales and London, although if you had London colleagues here, they would say potentially the devolution conversation isn't complete there. But there's more to be done. There's absolutely more to be done.
I think you're right, Vince, when you talk about the importance of Labour's 5 missions and how understanding that all those impact on local government, and local government has a role to play in delivering them all. Like, from our point of view here in Stoke-on-Trent, as local councillors, one of the things that's most important to us is that the health service is back up and running to a standard that we can be proud of. We have very low levels of good health in the city, and we have early mobility in the city. And a lot of that is to do, yes, with historical industrial capacities, but it means that our NHS is always stretched, and we absolutely have to get back on top of that. When Labour's in government and makes that its mission to sort it out, that's going to make local life much better, and it's going to make the work of the council much better when we work more closely with our colleagues in the rest of the NHS system. So you're right, we are just one brick in the wall, as it were.
Yeah. I just want to ask then, so the people who are listening to this right now may well be Labour members who have never been involved in local campaigns, or any campaigns for that matter. They might not have even been aware that they could one day become a councillor themselves. So I'd like you to now start with you, Jane. Would you just like to say some words to them about how maybe they can make a difference and get involved in their local Labour team?
Some of the best people who just blossom when they join a campaign team are people who are brand new to being involved in Labour. Talking to people is what you need to be good at to do one sort of the work of campaigning work that we do. If you are good at chatting with people, you're the sort of person who's always talking to people in the shops and so on and so forth, you will probably become our star door knocker, going around with your candidates, striking up conversations. You can't imagine how much you'll be valued if you're good at that. If you're a good administrator, wow, that's a real rare skill. And someone who's able to hold the paperwork together, do some of the work around on spreadsheets and or on our text systems, or write leaflets or do layout of leaflets, all that is really, really, really welcome. And if you're the more shy retiring type, which a lot of great people are, and great councillors are as well, leafleting, just prepared to put in the slog to do the leafleting without finding yourself exposed to situations you don't really fancy very much, great. There's a role for everybody in getting involved in what the Labour Party needs to do now in order to win on May the 2nd, but also needs to do to win the general election when the Tories finally find a bottle to call it.
Love that. What about yourself, Vince? What do you want to say on that?
Yeah, Jane is right. I agree with Jane. That should be the hashtag for this edition of the podcast. I agree with Jane. But Jane is absolutely right on this. There is something for everybody to do. One of the challenges is around trying to make sure that our council chambers, and I think the Labour Party have got a moral responsibility around this, that our council chambers mirror our communities that we represent. And let me give you an example of that, and this is why representation matters. So I'm really proud that I have a majority Labour female councillors. I have a 50-50 gender balanced cabinet. My main political opponents in Medway are the Conservatives. On gender, the Conservatives have 20 councillors, of which 20 are men. That's it. So it's about saying, actually, we've all got a role and responsibility to play in that. It's about recognising, it does take time, but it doesn't need to take your life. And I'd say that as well. There are some people who, particularly if you take on an executive role like Jane and I have, That will take a proportion of your time, a big proportion of your time. It doesn't need to be that way. If you're a frontline councillor, there are lots of my frontline councillors who balance it well with caring responsibilities, with a day job. So it doesn't need to take over your life. But absolutely, there are roles to play as well. And whether you've got some expertise in using technology, whether you've got some good shoe leather on the bottom of your shoes, whether you've got the ability to get a leaflet through without getting your hand nabbed by a cat or a dog. I've only been injured by a cat. I've never been bitten by a dog. I was injured by a cat once. And the cat owner just gave me that look of saying, I don't care. Thanks to that cat owner. The cat was fine, don't worry. My finger, which was bleeding, was not fine. So look, there's something for everyone to do. And ultimately, it is about, this election and the next election. So, yeah, we don't have Medway Council elections, but we've got a Kent Police and Crime Commissioner election. So we're supporting Lenny Rolls, who's our candidate. We had a hustings here last night. He did brilliantly. We've been up to support and actually reciprocate that support. So here in Medway, because of where we are in the country, we had a lot of support from London Labour colleagues. London Labour did a great job of coming out to support our campaign here and other campaigns up and down the country. So we're really pleased. This coming weekend, there'll be a Medway team going on tour to Lewisham. I was out in Islington and Bromley over the weekend just gone. So look, it's about that again, that solidarity, saying actually we want to support each other in the campaigns that we have.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, both of you, so much for that. I wish you all the best of luck with your councils and your campaigns, with your communities, and that the work you do goes from strength to strength.
Thank you.
And that other people listening might one day be joining you in your particular councils as our Labour candidates and councillors as well. I just want to say, Matthew, thank you to you listening today. If you do want to be part of that, then please get in touch with your local council. Look up the structure. Where I am in Cambridge, it's so bizarre. We've got the mayor, the city council, the district councils, the GCP, the other groups that have been put in with other funding. It gets really confusing sometimes, but look into it and see where you can get involved in the local Labour Party. And guys, thank you. It's been a brilliant show. Take care.
Thank you very much, Dan. And you bring two Labour councillors together, the conversation will flow and there'll be a lot of it. Thanks very much.
Take care, guys. Bye for now. Before I go, may I ask a massive favour? Like this podcast and smash that subscribe button. Leave a review. Share this podcast with other Labour Party members, your CLPA executive, and anyone who, like us, wants to fight for the next Labour government our country so desperately needs. If you're a candidate and wish to come onto the show, then email me at labourpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, bye for now.